Hey, greetings and welcome to this Baker Bookhouse author event. Whether you joined us in our Grand Rapids store or online, thank you so much for being here. My name is Bart Denny. I'm the nonfiction book buyer here at Baker Bookhouse, and joining us tonight is Dr. Thom Rainer. Dr. Rainer is the founder and CEO of Church Answers. He's a former pastor, a best-selling author with literally dozens of books to his credit. He earned his Master of Divinity and Doctor of Philosophy degrees from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Dr. Rainer has over 40 years of ministry experience under his belt. He is the host of two tremendous podcasts, Rainer on Leadership and Revitalize and Replant with Thom Rainer. Now, if anything, Dr. Rainer is passionate about the growth and health of the local church and its leaders. We're talking with him tonight about his recently released book, I Am a Christian. At least that's where we'll start, and we'll see where it goes from here. Now, for those of you in our virtual audience, either on Facebook or join us on Zoom, please be thinking of your questions for Dr. Rainer and send those to us in the Facebook comments or the Zoom chat. And if you're in the audience in the store, my colleagues, Scott and Christina, will have paper for you to write your questions on. And just raise their hand, they'll bring that on over to you. Dr. Rainer, welcome. I am so glad you're joining us here tonight. Thank you so much for your time. And I can tell you that your ministry's personally been a blessing to me over the years. And I'm really looking forward to our talk tonight.
Well, thank you, Bart. And you were kind to say those words. And when you talk about how long I've been in ministry, that just proves one thing: I'm old. It doesn't prove a whole lot of other things. You get enough years under your belt and you can have those type of supposed accolades added, but God has blessed, but above all, he's been very gracious in my life. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I look forward to how we'll be interacting both virtually and with you in person.
Excellent. Well, I'm a Christian came out in November of 22?
I think that's right.
Yeah, and in fact, you've had one come directly on its heels called I Believe, and we just received that here in the store, hot off the presses, and it really covers the essentials of the Christian faith, the primary beliefs that regardless of denomination or faith tradition, that every Christian ought to hold to. I get the sense both with I Am a Christian and with I Believe that you're kind of looking from church health almost from a back to basics approach. Can you tell us more about that? Why this book? Why now? Are we really so bad off as the capital C church that we don't know who we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to believe?
The bad news is, yes, we are that bad off. We've been doing a survey of church members since 1996, again, a reflection of my elderly status. And we have this longitudinal research where we are looking at the beliefs of these church members. And basically what we're seeing, Bart, is an erosion of belief, an erosion in belief in the Bible. And accompanying that are erosions in belief in Christian behavior. For example, only 1% of churches, fewer than 1% of churches in North America, roughly 350,000 to 400,000, only 1%, fewer than 1%, have any type of ongoing evangelism as a part of their church. So we have churches, 99+% of churches that aren't obedient to the Great Commission. Some of that is directly tied to belief or lack of belief. The two books that you mentioned that I know we're looking at I Am a Christian, but you mentioned I Believe as well. I Am a Christian was written in the context of church members. Do you really know what it means to be a Christian? And so while it could be used in a new members class, I look at this book as something that a pastor or a leader can use. Of course, it can be read individually to allow his church members to let God examine what their beliefs and what their behavior is to answer the question, are we really Christians? Recently wrote an article, I think it was this Monday, and I estimated, and I have to be very careful, but I estimated the percentage of church members who are attending 3 times a month, 2 times a month, and 1 time a month, and then 1 time a year, and how many of that group are Christian. And obviously, the fewer times you attend, the more likely you are not to be a Christian. That is not suggesting that church membership or church attendance saves you, but it is suggesting that there is a fruit of behavior that accompanies being a Christian. So when I wrote I Am a Christian, the subtitle is Discovering What It Means to Follow Jesus Together with Fellow Believers. And I think part of the erosion of attendance, health, gathering for worship in many of our churches today is directly related to the fact that many people really don't know if they are followers of Jesus Christ, and perhaps many do not. While I cannot judge the heart, I can just simply say, based upon both anecdotal evidence and conversations with people who became Christians later, we feel like that there's a significant portion of our church population who is not Christian. So that's why I wrote the book, I Am a Christian. Are you really following Christ? And are you doing so in the context of a local church? Just a reminder, the New Testament from Acts 2 all the way to Revelation 3 was either about the church, in the context of the local church, or to the church. So almost all of the writing of the New Testament after the four Gospels was about the local church. God gave us the local church as his plan A for his mission on earth, and he didn't give us a plan B. And sometimes we say, well, this church is got people who are hypocrites. They got people who done this type of sin or that type of sin. And that is exactly right. In fact, the New Testament is full of that. Go to 1st and 2nd Corinthians, go to Galatians, where there's doctrinal problems, even go to that wonderful book, Philippians, where there's all this rejoice and joy in it. And you'll see a church fight breaking out between Euodia and Syntyche. And so, yes, it is an imperfect institution, but it is what God gave us to carry out his mission. And so I guess I'm a little bit passionate, Bart, about this whole thing about being a part of a local church, because that is part, as I understand the New Testament, that is part of it, what it means to be a Christian, to be willing to be in the presence and being a disciple in the context of other believers. And when we see church attendance begin to fracture and people start attending less, that is usually an indication of where the heart is rather than any type of other issue. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I'm warming up a little bit. I'm going to go too far into that, and I'd rather hear from you or anybody else at this point.
Sure. Well, I know that you are passionate about revitalization of churches. Of course, given the name of the podcast, that would seem to suggest that.
Right.
And as it seemed, did you arrive at the conclusion that before we even start talking about revitalizing churches, that we've really got to look hard inside and take this back to basics approach as really a first step? What kind of precipitated that? Because you've talked about revitalization for a number of years, going way back to breakout churches, I guess it was.
Boy, you've got a memory to breakout churches. Good gravy train. That goes so far back that I would think you'd be too young to remember that.
Oh, I wish.
Well, you're asking the question of revitalization. I guess I was into revitalization before revitalization was cool, and it is now an accepted discipline, is now an accepted practice in the church. Revitalization has come along because, well, 91% of churches are in a decline, or they are somewhat stagnant. And so when you have numbers like that, you know that revitalization, which literally means to live again, revitalization is absolutely necessary. As we have looked so much into the heart of churches and trying to find out and diagnose as best we can in God's power what is taking place in these churches, the first thing we do is we admit that culture is no longer friendly to Christianity. We get that. We're very much first century in that sense. I mean, the culture does not applaud Christians for the most part. And so we understand that culture is not friendly. And so that's a part of what is taking place. So when we look at revitalization, we know that particularly since the quarantine and the pandemic, that 20 to 30% of our losses were cultural Christians, which is an oxymoron, because it's not really a Christian, but someone who is a Christian in name only because they felt like they wanted to be accepted by their business and politics or in their neighborhood. And so they thought it was important to say, I'm a church member, or I'm a Christian. Those people have all but gone. What the quarantine taught them was I don't have to be a part of a church to be accepted. I don't have to go there anymore. I didn't really want to anyway. So cultural Christianity has gone and has exacerbated what was already a steady decline in a lot of churches, the great majority of churches. We examine these churches. We are in constant conversation with church leaders in a multitude of different ways. And the more and more we examine it, the more and more we're getting back to it. Maybe we have to get back to the basics. Maybe these are foundational issues. What does it mean to be a Christian? What do you really believe? I kind of have been surprised that I believe its official release date is today, if I recall correctly. And I've been surprised at the reception to it in a good way. I have already done several interviews on it, even today, and I've beginning to get calls from church leaders, or at least we're being contacted at Church Answers about this book and a potential resource that will go with it. And I think that is telling us something. That is saying that we can talk about a lot of methodologies that are important, and they are. We can talk about a lot of demographics and psychographics, which are important. But if the foundation is not secure, if the foundation is not upon which the church is built, then nothing is going to solve the problem. And so when I wrote I Believe, it's a very simple book. Every book I write is simple. Most of the books I've written in the last few years are short. And the reason is I'm not smart enough to write long books, so I write short books. And this book is the I Believe book, just like I Am a Christian, is very short because I just wanted to get to the essence of Christian belief. Let's get to the foundational issues. We're not going to get to tertiary issues. We're not going to get to secondary issues. We're going to get to the essence. And do you really believe these? The response to this book has surprised me. I know I'm mixing two books up, I'm a Christian and I Believe, but you're following me. Maybe nobody else is.
That's right. That's right. Well, what would you say to the church out there that says, well, I hear you, Thom. I get where you're coming from, and that everything you've written looks reasonable, but not us, not our church. We're not in that 91%. And anyone who visited the church would probably clearly see that they very much are in that 91%. How would you reply to that church member, that pastor, that whoever is saying, not us?
I did my first consultation in 1988. Now, that is a reflection of age, nothing but age. It was an accidental consultation. I was a pastor in St. Petersburg, Florida. I had a friend call me who was also a pastor in St. Pete. And he said, our church is declining. Hey, I heard you got a doctoral degree. Can you help me? I just kind of laughed, yeah, like a doctoral degree can help do anything that is practical. But I wanted to do him a favor. So I left my pulpit for one Sunday and just went and looked at his church on a Sunday and kind of looked around a little bit to try to figure out what it was. And it was apparent as an outsider. It was obvious as an outsider. What you saw at the church on the inside did not look anything like the community on the outside. Different demographics, different colored skin. And, I told him, I said, you're not reaching your neighborhood, and your church will die unless you reach your neighborhood, because fewer and fewer people are going to drive in. And that was an easy consultation in the sense that I just gave him some advice. Well, before I knew it, he had told someone that I'd helped him, and that someone called me, and then someone else, and we started doing more and more consultations, ultimately where we are today with Church Answers. The most common thing that we heard up until about certainly after the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, the most common thing that we heard from church members when we interviewed them is, my church is fine. And so the issue was denial. And it's hard to help a patient get well when the patient will not admit that they are sick. And so many of the consultations were difficult. The pastors may have seen it, but the pastor was leading congregants who refused to acknowledge reality. Some pastors did not acknowledge it as well. So denial was one of the big problems that we ran into in consultation. It doesn't matter what we recommend to this church. They're going to say, no, that's not happening to us. Here is a vivid example. We were consulting with a church in Illinois, and it's been many years ago. And we one of the things they wanted to know was what's the health of their church. We asked for the usual information, including worship attendance. And we looked at the worship attendance, and the worship attendance had gone from 600 to 300 in 20 years. Gradual. I mean, think about that. I mean, what is that? 12 people, 13 people a year in attendance. It had been so gradual, about one person a month, really, that many of the members did not notice it. And so I was interviewing one of the senior saints of the church, what we do in many of our consultations. And she said, I don't know why you're. And I said, we're here because we're trying to find out if we can help your church. She said, my church doesn't need help. And I said, why do you say that? She said, it's as healthy as always. I said, are you aware that your church is now half the attendance as it was 2 decades ago? She said, well, I've been here 3 decades, and that's not true. I said, but you gave us the numbers. And she said, well, somebody lied. That's the situation that we dealt with. But now, Bart, what has happened leading up to the pandemic, especially the quarantine time of the pandemic, and coming out of it, that denial is not as pervasive as it once was. And the reason is many churches got the shock treatment when they regathered after the pandemic and the quarantine, and people were gone, and attendance had fallen, and all these other things that we know is common that happened during the quarantine. Since that time, we have fewer and fewer church members that are saying they don't need help. It's still there, but not nearly as pronounced as it was just a few years ago.
Well, that sounds like good news then. And of course, we've got I am a Christian here at the store. We've got I believe, which came out today, as you mentioned, and you also mentioned evangelism at Church Answers Resources. You've got Sharing the Gospel with Ease that you wrote, Dr. Rayner, and the Anatomy of a Revived Church. But at Church Answers, you're not the only author. There are a number of people that work with you who have produced Church Answers resources. In fact, here in the store, we've got a Church Answers resources display.
That is so cool. Thank you.
And we love it. We would love for more church leaders and church members to take advantage of it. And of course, Church Answers is a whole lot more than books, although you've got plenty. I would love to hear more for our audience, if you wouldn't mind explaining the ministry of Church Answers.
Church Answers ministry is simple. It is helping church leaders get healthier and churches get healthier. And when I mean healthier, I mean in a way that they can help their churches. So we know if church leaders have healthy leadership and healthy spiritual disciplines, they will help the church. We know churches need to get healthy. Our focus is in our name, church. Now, it may sound a little bit presumptuous for us to say we are Church Answers, is like we got all the answers. It's a nice name, but we don't have all of the answers. But our heart is really in the local church. Our heart is local churches getting healthy. Sometimes that is through helping leaders. Sometimes that is going directly to the congregants. And so anything and everything that you see about Church Answers, churchanswers.com, you'll just see all these articles and you'll see podcasts, some of them that you mentioned. And everything that we do is focused on, let's do what we can to walk alongside leaders for the local church. We are not the local church at Church Answers. We are there to walk alongside others in the church. We are parachurch, if you will. We walk alongside, and we are not there to replace the church or anything that the church is supposed to do, but we love the local church and we want to help her. And so I remember when many years ago we were thinking about the name for our company, and I don't remember who came up with the name Church Answers. It's been so long. Jeff Bezos remembers when he saw Amazon. I don't remember when I saw Church Answers. But the question that I asked was, is that a presumptuous name, to say that we have the answers? And basically, we heard from a lot of people that no, it just describes what we do. And that is where our heart is. And it is a blessing to be a part of a ministry that has the heart of the local church in its ministry. That's what we do. One of the more exciting things that we have done recently, we love seminaries, we love Bible colleges, and we love the fact that they have trained men and women for ministry, typically vocational ministry. But we came across a lot of people who could not or would not go to what we typically think of as the typical institutions of training. And so we came up with a ministry called Church Answers University that certifies people for Christian ministry. It's not a degree, but it's the certification. It has been amazing to watch the growth of Church Answers University. Once again, our heart is about the church. Among the first enrollees were 50 Ugandans. And that just blew me away. We immediately had a global audience. We have other countries as well. But a ministry in Kampala, Uganda said, most of our pastors do not have any formal training and cannot afford access to anything. Most of them do not have degrees. And so we created Church Answers, yes, for the bivocational pastor or for the co-vocational pastor that has not received this training. And we created it for them so that they could have the right training, good biblical training in the local church. And we've been able to do it so affordable for people and just in a way that anybody is able to get this training. That to me is one of the most exciting ministries we have to help the local church. You see, you got me started again, talking about the local church and Church Answers. You got just start doing this, Mark, and tell me to stop, or maybe put it in chat when you want me to be quiet.
Well, yeah, I think you got the choir sitting over here on the other side,
Yes.
definitely. And I think one of the things that's really struck me most about Church Answers is Church Answers Central. Now, if you say you don't have all the answers, my experience with Church Answers Central is that someone's got the answer.
You're there pretty regularly, are you not?
Clearly, yeah.
And that is an amazing place where you've got about 2,000 church leaders, and every few minutes someone is asking a question, sometimes making a comment, but asking a question, and they're really looking for answers to it. And within an hour or so, the community has responded and given answers. Some of us at Church Answers, we call ourselves subject matter experts, but I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but we have answered. And it's basically a church consultant or a church advisor on your smartphone or on your laptop or Mac. And that has been one of the most rewarding things, to see this community get answers. You know what? I think that we have asked 3 people in the history of Church Answers to no longer participate in the forum. And it's been going for quite a while. And what I'm saying is, it's not snarky. It's always helpful. It is kind. And if we have continuous behavior that looks like it's something that might be posted on a typical social media post, we just stop it. But we haven't had to do it much because our community really takes care of itself through everybody chipping in. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm glad you're there.
I'm happy to be there. Well, we've got a few questions that have come in from the audience. The first one here, and I'm trying to make sure I understand the question correctly, is when confronting a denier in the church, how would you attempt to persuade them before you move forward? Do you leave them without a church home? Is that good shepherding? So I'm presuming The idea here is that moving along without someone's buy-in or I don't know, running them off, but how do you persuade someone? And when do you give up on trying to persuade someone to,
so if I'm understanding the
around?
context of the question, and if I don't get it fully, maybe someone can re-ask it in a way to clarify anything that I might miss. If I understand the context, what do you do about someone who denies the condition of the church and the condition that the church is in? And the answer to the question is you don't, it is rare to get that person to change. It is rare. God can do anything, but it is rare. So what you have to do is respect, love that person, care for them, but you have to move on with those who are ready to move on. And again, that is not a harsh statement to say we're going to leave you behind because they can still be a part of the church. It's simply to say that we cannot let veto power an individual run the ministry of a church. And so you have to move on.
All right. Yeah, I think that that definitely got the idea of what the questioner was asking. And another person wanted to talk about how COVID has changed your ministry. And I believe that they're talking about, and Scott will correct me if they're not talking about Church Answers, but I presume that's Church Answers and what you saw and how you, the things that changed and how you served your community and people in your ministry throughout COVID.
There are two aspects to how we responded to COVID. The first aspect is how did Church Answers as an organization respond? We were very accustomed to in-person engagements. We were very accustomed to working with churches while they were in person in worship attendance. And so when COVID hit, especially the quarantine is what I'm talking about, when the quarantine hit, it was a shock to the system of Church Answers, just like almost every other organization, church, business, whatever. We were not immune from that. So we asked two questions. What can we do while churches are not gathering? And how can we look to the future after they gather? Those were the two big questions that we asked. What can we do while they're not gathering? And how can we look to the future and be prepared for what's on the other side of the quarantine? So one of the things that we did is, this is pretty common today, but we went totally virtual with our events. We're beginning to get more in person, but we went totally virtual. And we were surprised at the response. We were surprised that, for example, when we do a free webinar on a particular topic, that instead of hundreds, we got a few thousand to show up. And we were doing as many as 20 plus a year. And there was just a hunger for it. Now we know part of that hunger was they were at home and they wanted to have something to do. It's the same reason that Netflix, I guess, boomed during that time. But it was amazing to see how many people would come to this. That was one of our pivots during that, to go digital, because we weren't doing in-person consultations. We weren't really seeing many of our resources go to churches because they weren't gathered to use the resources. So we did that, and it seemed to help. The next thing we did is we asked the question, what's on the other side of the quarantine? And again, we're not proleptic. We don't have perfect vision, but we began to look at both culture and we began to look at churches. And as churches in some states were allowed to regather earlier than others, we started taking note of what was happening there. And so we started picking up the trends. We were fortunate that we were able to communicate to our audience and sometimes beyond, here's what we see in the church. In fact, one of the little books I wrote was called The Post-Quarantine Church, and it was just about that. By the way, that book was written in 19 days. So you talk about a fast book to come out. It had to be done quickly to get it to the audience before the quarantine was over, because we wanted to look at what it might look on the other side. So that was the fastest book I've ever written. Even though it's tiny, it's still a book. I think it still has a cover and a back on it, so it's still a book. So those were some of the things that we did and how we adapted. Now we're in a new phase. And as you indicated, talking about revitalization, we're in new revitalization. We're in a new form of revitalization. There's a lot of things that are taking place. One of them is church adoption, where one church adopts another church that is dying and brings it into its family. And now you have, instead of one campus, you have two campuses, but the same church. That used to be called church merger acquisition. We prefer the familial name of church adoption because you're bringing them into the family. We're seeing more and more church fostering, another familial term, where healthier churches are helping less healthier churches for a defined period of time. And we're seeing more churches open to intervention, to whether it's a consultant or something to help them change in a direction that they know is not a good direction for them. What is happening at Church Answers is, quite frankly, we're having more than we can handle, and that's a good thing. We're having more consultations, more requests, more resources. It is a good thing. But at the same time, we're trying to make sure that we don't shortchange our audience just because of the growth, shortchange the congregations, I should say. So those are some of the things that happened with and at Church Answers. And once again, our questions were primarily focused on how can we help the local church?
Excellent. And, speaking of your book, the Post-Quarantine Church, I'll put a plug in for that and say it's here at Baker Bookhouse, available. And if you're here in the store, it's on our author table, and you'll see it right there. It's great reading. I think it's still gives good insight into what the church is looking like after COVID. I don't think that's really played out entirely.
Right.
So I think that's a good thing. And I do have another question here online. One of our audience asked, could you define biblically church membership?
Yeah, church membership biblically is best defined by the Bible. So church membership is mentioned at different points in Scripture. One of the most common points of Scripture is 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul, writing to the church at Corinth, says, you are a member of the body of Christ. And as a member, you're to be functioning fully. Oftentimes, we don't like the term membership because it has cultural connotations. You may think maybe about a civic club, maybe even worse, about a country club. And that's what membership is to you, where, especially in the country club, you pay a dues and you get your perks. Membership preceded all of those in the Bible. And Paul does use the word member. He does talk about the members of the body of Christ. It is a word which indicates that you are to be fully functioning within the context of your local body. He has that concern in 1 Corinthians, where he is saying many people are not doing so, and as a result, the church is unhealthy. So I believe in church membership. I think I wrote a book called I'm a Church Member some time ago. And I believe in church membership because it is a commitment. It is a covenant between the church and the people. And it's like, imagine this, and I hope this illustration doesn't break down too quickly. Imagine that Tom Rainer is about to get married to Nellie Jo. Now, that was 45 years ago, but just imagine that it's happening. And imagine that I say something like in the vows, I love you, girl, and I'll always love you. But you know what? I just don't want to spend much time with you. And so I'll be in and out. Well, my guess is that Nellie Jo would have walked away before the vows were ever finished if that was my commitment. My point in all of that is that the Bible talks about a deep commitment to the local church. The writer of Hebrews says, forsake not the assembling of the saints. Don't stop assembling and going to worship. Church membership is our declaration that we are identifying with the church. Now, you may have issues with how you become a member, where you have to fill out forms or all that. Those are organizational issues. Ultimately, church membership is your commitment to a local body that you're going to be fully functioning. 1 Corinthians 12 makes that very clear. When you read that, you are a member of the body of Christ. And by the way, what comes right after 1 Corinthians 12? 1 Corinthians 13. The love chapter is about church membership. You can read it in a wedding, that's fine. But it follows 1 Corinthians 12, where it's talking about the body of Christ. And then he says, oh, by the way, you Corinthian church members, I want to talk to you about your relationship with each other. And that's where he goes into the love chapter. And he talks about clanging cymbals and all of these things where they were having disruptions in worship service. That's not a commentary on contemporary music. It's just, that's what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 13. But he reminds them that the greatest of these is love, because your relationship to the church and to your church members is to be that unconditional love. It's not fully possible to love like Christ does, but we are to strive in his power to get us close to that. So my answer about church membership is, I do believe it is some type of commitment that is evident to the body. Now you can decide what that will be. And how it's done organizationally depends on denominations, depends on different polity decisions. But ultimately, I truly believe that all of us should be able to declare, I am a church member, in the biblical sense that we are committed to a local body and we have declared it clearly one way or another.
That's well said. We receive a lot of, we've seen a lot of books lately. We see a lot of podcasts and magazine articles that talk about church members who say, well, I understand all of that, but I've been deeply hurt in church, and all kinds, from fairly mild things to things that are very, very concerning and some kind of famous or infamous that many of us would know about. How do you respond to that person, or how do you advise a pastor or a church leader who is counseling someone like that?
Well, first of all, we acknowledge the truth of their statement. There has been a lot of hurt in the church. There has been a lot of abuse in the church. There have been a lot of people who feel deep pains for what has happened in the church. So the first thing that you do is you simply have to say, your pain is real. It does not need to be denied. Now, I am not going to suggest to that person, now go get yourself back in a church. But I am going to suggest, over time, consider that God may lead you back to a healthy local body of believers. Not perfect, but a healthy, where instead of being beaten up or even abused in the church, hurt in any way, you can learn how a church can love, you can learn how a church can care, and you can be a part of it as well. So the first thing that I would do, which I have done with people who've been deeply hurt, is just simply to say, you're right. There is a bunch of mess in the church. And I don't advise them to go back to the church where they got hurt, that's for sure. But in time, I hope that God will do a work in their hearts where they can connect to a local church that is so different from the one that they left. When we are hurt by a family member, and whether it's abuse or some other type of hurt, we usually end up going to some family. We usually end up in some familial situation. It may not be going back home where that abuse took place, but we usually connect and become a part of a family either way. Anyway, so my commendation is, be open. Just ask God to do a work in your heart. And at the time that you are ready, find a church that is not like the church that caused you to leave participating in local congregations.
All right. And so for someone that maybe has no idea, what does a healthy church look like? It seems to me that it's been measured a lot in, the phrase goes noses and nickels, but it seems to be something far different from that, because we've certainly seen unhealthy situations in very large and financially prosperous churches. So what should that person that doesn't even know be looking for when they're trying to find a healthy church?
Well, first of all, you're probably not going to land on it with metrics. So, if you look at the metrics of a church, size, money, that's probably not going to be the ultimate measurement of the health of a church. Health is something that is, you know it when you see it, but you're not sure how to define it. We know how to define health of a Christian from the perspective of the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. A healthy church should be a going church that looks beyond itself. If a church is inwardly focused and everything is about the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I, or people within the church, it is not a healthy church. It is not obedient to the Great Commission. So find those churches that you know are reaching beyond their own walls, who have a missional perspective, who have a Great Commission perspective. Again, you can't measure it, but you'll be able to see it pretty quickly. And you will recognize it as well by the members, because in a healthy church, members are more likely to be saying, what can I do for God through my church? In an unhealthy church, they will be fighting over their preferences and their desires. So that would be one of them. I would then say the Great Commission, the Great Commandment. And is it evident that there is love of God? Is it evident that there is love of people within the church? Back to 1 Corinthians 13. Again, that sounds a bit vague and maybe even ambiguous, but most people know a church that is exuding love. Usually within 1 week or 2 weeks, they say there's something about this church. So the healthy church will be a church reaching beyond itself and loving with an unconditional intensity of its own and beyond its own. Great Commission, Great Commandment, not necessarily metrics, but that's how you'll see a healthy church.
Excellent. So that we see if we have any more questions here. All right. And we've certainly appreciated your time. Would you say that one measure of health would be that the church looks like the community around it? I know one time, some years ago, I was doing pulpit supply and got there a little early, drove around the block and saw what the community looked like, and went inside the church, and it looked nothing like all the people that were around there. So I'm guessing that could be a measure of unhealthiness. So conversely,
yeah, it would
more like the community.
It would be a measure that they're not reaching their community. So that would be a Great Commission obvious factor. Okay. This church is all one race or one ethnicity. The church, the community is significantly different. That means that church is not on mission inside its own community. That's what it would seem evident to be. What I love that has taken place in terms of trends is the return of the neighborhood church movement. Hang on just a second, got a cough. The neighborhood church movement means that more and more churches are focusing right around their community, and there is a rejuvenation of the church and the neighborhood as a result. Two of the leading voices in this are Jimmy Scroggins at Family Church in West Palm, and then Sam Rayner at West Bradenton Church in Bradenton. There are others, but they're the ones that, like Sam Rayner's church, calls itself a neighborhood church for the nations. Well, his community is so diverse. I don't know how many nationalities and ethnicities that he has in the church, but it's so diverse. But he said, we are first called to Jerusalem, our neighborhood, and we're going to reach them, because if we don't reach them, we will not be obedient to the Great Commission as we're called, certainly not the Acts 1:8 Commission. And so one of the strategies that Sam did was he said, the staff can't look like the people outside of the community. The staff has to start looking like people inside the community. And now I look at the staff of his church, and I don't know all the ethnicities that are represented, but it is a beautiful picture of what is in the neighborhood now, because the community was able to see this isn't just lip service that we want to reach the community. They started bringing leadership that's in the community that looks like the community. Good point. It goes back to the Great Commission.
Excellent. Well, I've got one more question here. And I'm trying to understand that. Scott, if you can get them to elaborate. The question is, are church programs that take place in your church part of the Great Commission? So
I'll give my favorite answer to that. It depends.
It depends. Yeah, I've heard that a few times.
Programs are not inherently evil. Sometimes we say, oh, I don't want to go to a program-based church. Well, I don't know what that means, because eventually you'll start getting some rhythms of things that you do in your church. And even though you don't call it programs, it looks like a program, it smells like a program, it probably is a program. So programs in itself are neither healthy nor unhealthy. Now, when they get unhealthy, it is when the program becomes the end instead of the means. And so we have a program to reach the community. We have a program to disciple people. That's healthy. But when you say that this program is sacrosanct and we'll never touch it, that's when the program becomes unhealthy. I think we've had pendulum swinging all over the place, where we were heavily programmatic and it was more the end instead of the means. And then the pendulum swung and we're anti-program. We're not going to have anything to do with it. I'm hoping it swings back to where healthy programs are okay. And healthy programs are a reality of most churches, even though they may not call it that. You have to define what a program is. A program is a ministry that aids the church in its regular rhythm of life. And whether it is bought at a Christian publisher or whether it's purchased in a denomination, that's what it is. But when that program becomes, okay, we will always pledge our allegiance to that particular program and we won't do anything else and we won't evaluate it, that's when the means has become the end and programmatic churches become unhealthy.
All right. I think he nailed it, says Scott. All right. So that was what our questioner was asking. And thank you so much, Dr. Rayner. Before we go, are you able to give us a preview for us avid readers? What's coming down the pike? You have other books in the work that you're able to talk about, or
I do.
Or your
with I believe I am a Christian and sharing the gospel with fear with ease, I should say. And post-quarantine church, I had 4 books pretty close together, and so it will be, I'm thinking, don't hold me to it, but I think it will be 2024 before the next book now comes out after I believe. It is. I'll go and give the title with hopes that someone doesn't quickly write a book and do the same thing, but I'll go and give you the title. And it is called Where Have All the Church Members Gone? And it is a fable for those who like reading leadership books like Patrick Lencioni. It has that feel to it. And it's the story of 3 people who have just stopped showing up to church, and church leadership tries to find out why. And so that should be out. I don't know what month, but 2024. All
right. And does Sam or Dr. Lawless or any of the others at Church Answers have something coming out in the near future?
Sam has a book coming out this year called The Neighborhood Church. It is fantastic. It is fantastic. Get that as soon as you can, because this is a movement that I think many churches should consider, many church leaders should consider. Chuck Lawless just recently released a book on prayer, and he has another book on prayer coming out. The specific subject escapes me, but I know that he is one of the most prolific authors in the area of prayer and spiritual warfare. And so he has 2 books coming out with us. Another book that we have coming out is Reaching a Community That Has Changed Significantly. And Tyrone Barnett, an African-American pastor in the Atlanta area, is the author there. And his expertise is, he's done it. He is in one of those churches where one side of the railroad tracks literally is poverty, the other side of the railroad tracks is wealth. And how he's reaching both in that church is just a marvelous story. So I think that book by Tyrone Barnett will be out in 2023 as well. We have others, but those are some that come right to mind. We do have, and I almost forgot about this one. I do have another book coming out, and it's one that's foremost on my mind and just wasn't there. Oh my goodness, I just forgotten about it. You may know, Bart, that we have a resource called Pray and Go. You may have seen it or heard about it. Okay, we're coming up with the next iteration of Pray and Go. And basically, we're going to It has been our single best-selling resource, and believe it or not, we're going to retire it for a while. I don't know if we'll be retired indefinitely, but we're going to introduce a new resource called the Hope Initiative. And the Hope Initiative is just what it sounds. We have done research and beta tests on churches to find out how can we get church members to have a culture and an attitude that is more prayerful and evangelistic, not forcing them to do things, but what can we do? And we've been doing beta tests for a year, and basically we've come out with a 30-day kickoff, and it is essentially take some of your members. You don't have to take all of them. Take some of your members through these 30-day challenges and see what happens. And we've been doing this for about a year in terms of beta tests with actual churches. We've been blown away how it has impacted the individuals to have a heart to reach people, a heart to pray for people, and a heart for the community. So that resource called the Hope Initiative will have a book with it. And guess what the book is named? Pray and Go. It's a 30-day emphasis on transforming your church to be more outwardly focused. That's why we're retiring the resource.
Outstanding. Well, I've used Pray and Go before, and really saw it do some wonders for our church. And so I'm excited about this book.
I can't believe I forgot that one. I mean, that is the one that we have been preparing and prepping for more than any single book, because we have seen the results before the book comes out, but the book is just part of the resource to help. It's an entire resource to help churches look beyond themselves.
Well, we definitely look forward to that coming out. I would give a plug here for Baker Bookhouse that we have a number of Dr. Rayner's resources available, and as well a number of Church Answers resources written by several other authors. And I've just found them to be phenomenal resources. Just enjoyed them. Found
Thank you.
that they've been a blessing in my life and ministry. And so I would also encourage people to visit churchanswers.com, if that's the address, I believe, and look at the offerings that are there. And I think you put some pretty regular blog posts out there that are, I think, meaningful and really encouraging and helpful at times. And
thank you. We do 5 a week, 5 articles a week. Of course, I just write one of them, so we have other writers. And here's the thing, Bart, about going to churchanswers.com. Over 90% of our resources are free. So you don't have to come there thinking you have to spend your money. You can if you want to. That helps stay in business. But 90% of what we offer is free. So come to Church Answers and load up your digital cart and get whatever you want for free. Outstanding.
Well, we sure appreciate your time tonight, Dr. Rayner. And
thanks, Bart. Been good to be with you.
Yes. So hopefully at some point in the future, maybe we could get you back.
Sure.
We would love that. And
I might write a book in the future.
That's a possibility, I would suppose. Yeah. So we'll look forward to it. And we'll just I think that ends up. Oh, we got one more. No more. No. Oh, yeah, we're good. Thought I had another question. We're good. And again, appreciate your time. And with that, I think we're gonna go ahead and sign off here from Grand Rapids. And
thank you for the opportunity to be here, Bart.
Hope you enjoy your evening, sir.
Thank you to the Baker Bookstores as well.
Take care now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.